Okay, should we get going?
Yep, you can go ahead.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you. Okay, well, welcome everyone who's here on the Zoom, and for anyone on the live stream on the Facebook, to this Disabled Independent Gardeners Association presentation with Hives for Humanity. I'm Sarah, I'm the director and one of the co-founders of Hives for Humanity Society, and I'm really excited to be here to share a story about our work with people and plants and pollinators in Vancouver in the downtown east side, where we were founded in 2012. I'm wanting to take a moment at the beginning, always as we gather and come together to think about these pollinators, the honeybees, all the other pollinators, the birds and the beetles and the wild bees and the butterflies and the moths, all of these plants that make our gardens places where we can thrive and grow and connect to this land that is where I am today in Vancouver, unceded land of the Musqueam and Squamish and Tsleil-Waututh nations. So wanting, yeah, just to sit for a minute and feel the land beneath our feet, even as we gather this internet, Zoom and Facebook at a time where we aren't able to come together in the same way in our gardens, but wanting to really, yeah, remember the plants and remember the people and the pollinators that make all of this possible, and really be working towards building back reciprocal relationships in our communities, our human and our ecosystem communities. And for me and for Hives for Humanity, the honeybees are a way that we do that. They're really like a window or a door, an access point into nature and into connection with ourselves. So I'm really grateful to the honeybees and to the plants in this land, and to you for being here. So we are going to be bringing questions through from the live feed if you're over there, and if you're on the Zoom, please do ask questions in the chat, and I love interruptions. So if there's something that you want to clarify or something that you're excited about, I'm really happy to pause and get into it. And the session is being recorded for those who can't join right now. So I will start moving through my slides, and I'm going to play a few videos, but mostly we'll go through some photos and talk about bee biology and bee communication and behavior and habitat and forage and wild bees and more, kind of zigzagging through all of those. So this is the honeybee. That is the bee that most of us think of when we think of bees. It's certainly the bee that I grew up thinking about. And she is one of 20,000 species of bees worldwide. So in British Columbia, we have about 450 species, and in Vancouver, at last count, there were 56 unique species of bee counted. So the honeybee is not an indigenous bee to North America. Like myself, she's a settler. She was an uninvited guest, and this is why I always want to start with this question of thinking about how, for myself as a settler and working with these non-indigenous bees, how can we work to honor the land and all the bees that were here before. And one of the exciting things about honeybees, and like a really exciting connection to gardeners, is that the plants are how we do that. The plants are how we grow food for the bees. The plants are how we nurture this land and ourselves. So really thinking about like the interconnection between all of us in this this ecosystem of interconnection that is often forgotten in the city, but I think we feel it, when we're hands in the soil and also when our hands are in the hive. So this is one of our members, Ian, and he's got a little piece of honeycomb from one of our harvest celebrations on his finger there. And this is a little honeybee, a worker bee, so a female worker bee. She will be about one of 60,000 bees in the colony of honeybees. And she has come, she smelled that honey, she knows it's a sweet treat. She wonders why it's not in her hive stored up for winter. She lands, and she sticks her landing with her 6 legs, and they have little sticky pads and little claws to help her, if it's a flower that's blowing in the wind. So she sticks her landing on Ian's finger, and then she starts licking and sucking up with her proboscis, her tongue, that honey, which she'll store in her honey stomach and carry back to the colony. The honey is their carbohydrate. So it's a really high energy source of food that is distilled from the flowers. So the nectar that the flowers produce when they have the sunshine and the rain to do that is the sweet treat that attracts all of these pollinating insects. And then honeybees, this unique thing that honeybees are able to do because of their highly social behavior is that they're able to then store that honey. So honey is unique to the honeybee, so is wax, and so is their highly social behavior and their perennial hive, their hive that is around year after year, with queens living in the wild like 3 to 5 years perhaps. But pollination is not unique to the honeybee. Pollination is something that all of those 20,000 species of bee do, collecting nectar for energy and pollen for protein from the plants. And there are so many other insects and birds and other animals that pollinate too. So if we were hanging out together these days over Zoom, we gather in these circles, but you know, in other times, and I hope another time in the future with you, we might gather in one of the community gardens that you're a part of. And we would always start to gather around our smoker. So as beekeepers, we're always thinking about how we're moving into communication with the bees as we enter the apiary and as we start to inspect for the health and the balance of the colony of honeybees. And we tend to gather around the smoker as a starting point. There's a lot of ritual to fire and a lot of ritual to our work as beekeepers, and gathering our tools, preparing our tools, and really grounding and centering and coming into focus on what our work is going to be is always the first thing that we do. So this is some sage leaf here that you might recognize, and some peppermint as well. So we have this smoker where we build a small fire using burlap or other organic materials. We get it lit. We have these bellows here that I'm pumping to get a nice smoke, and the green of the herbs cools down the smoke so that we don't singe the wings of those bees, those fragile little wings that we can see here. We don't want to singe those. So the smoke helps cool down the heat of the fire, and it also adds that like beautiful fused smell of the sage and peppermint or whatever herbs or flowers you might be using. And it's a way for us to gather and prepare as we then start to put on our veils to keep the bees out of our hair and out of our ears and from crawling under our clothing, because we are mammals and the bees are designed to get stuck within the mammal hair. It's one of their like defensive sort of mechanisms, and then they will end up stinging if they feel stuck. So we want to avoid causing that defensive behavior in the bees, and being really aware of how we're moving, being aware of how we're moving into maybe the flight path of the bees where they are moving, being aware of our vibrations and our smells and our movements and our sounds. The bees communicate through pheromones, through chemicals. They communicate through vibrations, through like dance and through fanning and through buzzing, through waggling. You know, they can also communicate through taste and touch. So they have this really incredible vocabulary of all this like mix of chemicals and other signals. And so when we move into the apiary, we are becoming part of that communication. And so really being present and aware of how we're moving and what we might be communicating without our like spoken language, but with the language of our bodies is really key as we enter the apiary to start working with these insects, these honeybees. So as we get deeper in, we might actually start to really get close up and feel those bees walking on us. And as we hold the frames, we feel their vibrations and they feel ours. And this is one of the things that like, I find really beautiful about beekeeping is the really like tangible connection and the immediate impact. Like I make a move, I make a vibration, and they feel it and they respond. And you know, they're this like connection point between the land, you know, through the flowers and through the sun and through the water to the air that they're flying in to forage, and into our food and into our community as well. So these are honeybees again. And these bees are doing what we call festooning. So they are linked together, and you can kind of see how they make their chains, linking their feet, their hooked little feet, linking them together. So they hang together, and this is how they make the wax that they're going to build their whole life on. So they hang like that, and they push wax out. So they convert the honey and the pollen, they convert that in fatty cells inside of their abdomen, this third lower part of their body. They convert that honey into wax and in fatty cells, and they actually push little flakes of wax out of the segments between their abdomen, and then they scoop those up, they move it forward into their mandibles, and they sculpt it into the hexagons that they build their comb on. Yeah, and we call that festooning, and it's pretty wonderful to be a part of when we're beekeeping, because they're often filling gaps with these festoon chains, even in the moments between our inspections of frames. They are really fast to respond to changes in their colony. So here we're moving in again. And what I hope you can see here on the screen is a real diversity of colors of pollen. So we're looking at this was an earlier spring photo from this year that I took. So we've got these like yellows and sort of grayish browns and this nice red and orange, a sort of more white one, this really bright orange. This time of year, we're seeing gray coming in from the blackberry. Earlier in the season, some of that red was from the maple. Really early in the season, bright yellows and oranges from dandelions and irises. And this is like what is really exciting about keeping bees in the city, is with all the gardeners in the city, with all the greenways and all the trees that their city is planting, with everyone in backyards, planting flowers. We have this diversity of flowers, and with the diversity of flowers, we get a diversity of nectar and of pollen, so that our urban bees have a diet that is nutritionally diverse. And, you know, if we think about our diets, I often think about like what it might be like for me to eat only broccoli for a month. You know, like broccoli every now and again, super healthy, broccoli every day, I'm gonna get like diarrhea and get really sick. And that happens to the bees when they're not on diverse plants, so they get sick. So yeah, this like diversity of pollen, which is what they feed their young with, which is how they grow strong. So I'm just seeing a question from Lise, that it's only female worker bees that festoon, not the drones. Yeah, pretty much anything going on in the hive that is work is going to be a female bee. So festooning to make wax, packing cells with honey and pollen, feeding the young, defending the hive, cleaning the hive, carrying away the dead, foraging for nectar and pollen, feeding the queen, carrying away the queen's poo. Like anything that is work is going to be a female bee. If it's a male bee, you're going to find him eating nectar to get strong so that he can then go fly and mate with queens, and then he will die. So we do have drones on this frame that maybe you recognize. So here is the drone bee with his big bulgy eyes that are made for searching for queens when he's flying in the sky, his huge body which carries his mating apparatus, and his big wings that carry this like huge body through the air. Whereas the worker bees, this one and this one and this one, and almost all of them, another drone here, the worker bees have small detail-focused eyes for looking down, caring for the eggs, caring for the young, packing the food, looking into flowers, finding flowers to determine nectar sources. And that is common across almost all bees, almost all of those 20,000 species, is that the males are around for shorter amounts of time to mate and then usually die, where the females are around to work and gather and defend. And depending on if it's a truly social species like the honeybee, or a part social species like the bumblebee, or a solitary species like the mason bee, it might be just one mother, or it might be a mother with a bunch of aunties and sisters all caring for the young together. So yeah, here's another photo of worker bees, a closer up of what they look like when they're landing on the face of the hive. These worker honeybees who are coming in with this one really full pollen. I call them pollen panniers. Some people call them pollen pants, or pollen baskets is the more traditional name. There's like lots of fun to be had with coming up with names for the bee behavior. But this is these bees sticking landings on the front of the hive, and then they walk down, come into the hive, they'll go to where their pollen stores are and pack these different pollens down. So this one with this really bright orange. And so honeybees are loyal foragers. When they're out on a foraging trip, they will be foraging one plant. And it's one of the things that makes them good pollinators. And the other bees do this too. So bees are loyal to a flower on a trip. And as gardeners, one of the things that we can do then to support the bees is plant things in clusters. So instead of planting like I don't know, a lavender and then a mint and then a lemon balm and then a lily and then a peony, and then repeating like with a kind of a ladder, we would plant all of our peonies in a big cluster and all of our lavenders in a big cluster. And that makes it easier for the bees to find them and to forage them. It's less flying in between. So it's one way to attract wild bees and all bees though to your gardens, is to plant in like drifts or clusters. It makes it easier for them to identify the flower and the source. So I wanted to show a couple of our apiaries. So the apiary being the place where the bees live. This is our Hastings Folk Garden apiary, which is on the 100 block of Hastings Street in the downtown east side. And it's where we had our first colony, right beside the supervised injection site, this beautiful small lot that the community of the downtown east side tends and stewards as a place of green respite for folks experiencing poverty and the violence of poverty and exclusion in that community, and also who have this like deep generosity and connection to land and food and spirit. So this is Jim inspecting a frame here, our smoker wafting up all these like green, we have a big elderberry over on this side, and then we have a big Himalayan honeysuckle on this side, and our two hives here. So each of these is a colony with one queen, probably like 30 to 60,000 bees at any time of year, honeybees, and that will be almost all female bees. And then the drones, the male bees, are around seasonally if the colony can afford them, like if the colony is strong enough. And so when we inspect, we'll go through every frame, looking into every cell, looking to see all the stages of life, looking to see stores of pollen and stores of honey, looking at the behavior of the bees, their temperament, looking at how well fed the eggs look, really looking for balance and working to support their health. Just another question about the favorite honey attracting plants. I've seen lavender honey and other kinds that are not coming to mind right now. Yeah, you know, I have a slide at the end that I'll show. There are like so many things that the bees love. Really important that we plant indigenous plants to whatever area we're in, because those will support the indigenous bees who grew up in relation like over millions of years with those plants. Purple plants, like the ultraviolet, is what the bees see in. So yeah, the lavenders, the sages, the rosemaries, the oregano, like the, right now the hyssop, the licorice mint is in flower and it's like packed with bees. The California lilac is often really important. Dandelion is super important at the beginning of the year, and any of the asters, like the sunflowers and the daisies, are really important at the end of the year. So one of the things that bees need is bloom throughout the year, and there's so much that's going on in like July and August when everything's popping, but in like March and April that can be dearth, and in September that can be dearth too, and the bees are still around. So if we can start to look and focus on things at those like shoulder season times, then we can support earlier and later forage when the bees get cranky if they don't have enough food, and if they don't have enough food they also get sick, which is like why they're cranky. They can't feed their young. And here's another one of our garden and apiaries. This is Cathedral Square Park downtown, where we do some workshops. We actually have one coming up next week, and there are ramps. So it is an accessible park where you can get up to the back here where we have our apiary. We're going to do a workshop where we look at what we're growing to support wild pollinators on Thursday at noon. It's 566 Richards, and it's open and free, and I'll have some like plant and bee handouts. But yeah, I love this photo because I think it really illustrates like how rich an apiary can be and how we can foster a culture of diversity and inclusion and celebration and connection to land and community around this insect, around this bee. These hives were wrapped in art by an artist whose name is John W. Sam. He's a Janae artist who lives in Vancouver and is a part of the community in the downtown east side, and he made wolf and eagle on these boxes for us. These, we call them supers or brood chambers, where we keep the bees. And then all around we've built this pollinator meadow. And so, you know, around the culture of the hive, we can have beekeepers, we can have gardeners, we have poets, we have artists, we have drum makers, we have dancers. You know, there's all kinds of ways to build inclusion and to build access points for people to come into community if we grow our gardens and if we grow our communities with that intent. There's so much potential for us to find a place for everyone and to really learn from the bees where there is a role for everyone, where those roles change over time. Those roles change as the bees grow, those roles change with the seasons, but in a colony of bees, of the honeybees, every bee does have a role, and that is shifting and dynamic. So I love looking into the bees and thinking about how we can learn from them and how we can build our communities to be more resilient places through inclusion. So this is another one of our apiaries. I just want to show you, like, they can look so different in the city. This one is on the rooftop of the Vancouver Convention Center. So there's a big green roof up there. It's full of wildflowers. The fireweed is like higher. You can see in this picture, and this is like a bit earlier in the season, so it's like higher than my head now. There's all these beautiful, I think they're called Etherial's star, a lily, a purple lily that grows up there. There's a bunch of vetch, and this is what, you know, an urban meadow can look like, and what habitat and forage for all kinds of insects and all kinds of pollinating bees can look like. And this is me with Ian and Kevin and Horace, and actually Jim, who we saw earlier, is somewhere in the fireweed too. So we have 4 colonies up there. And it's quite an experience for our beekeepers who are members of the Downtown Eastside community, who you know, experience poverty and often would experience exclusion from places like this, places where there's a guard at the door, you know, where you might need ID, you might need to look a certain way to get in. And so in partnership with the convention center, through the bees, finding ways to welcome all kinds of people into that space and build these pathways for people through like relationships of dignity and respect and trust. And this is, again, like why I'm excited about honeybees, because we can do this work together. So thank you for these questions, Liza. How many locations does Hives for Humanity have in the city? So you know the Fairmont rooftop, yeah, which is actually kind of kitty corner to this Vancouver, and Cathedral Square, which I was just showing here. And we looked at the Hastings Folk Garden. Here's another one, Soul Food, over in False Creek. We have 19 apiaries in Vancouver, and then 1 more out in Richmond. And so we do all of our apiaries in partnerships with other organizations, and all of our programming is possible through partnership. So we work with the PHS, Community Services Society, Brain City Housing Society, Atira Women's Resource Society, Lookout Society, and BC Housing, who are all nonprofits and charitables, creating access to health and housing for people who are experiencing various disability. So we work with all of those organizations with, like, they have 2 or 3 apiaries per organization, where we then are coming into supportive housing or coming into community gardens and offering this connection to land and food through the bees alongside those partners. And then these business partners to the DVBIA and Parks Board with Cathedral, Fairmont, Vancouver Convention Center. We do a bit of work with Science World when they're open. So we're kind of here and there throughout the city. These like nooks and crannies that we can find in the city are another reason why beekeeping is so exciting. And so even with all of this development, like this is West 2nd, over by Crow Street, which is right here, all of this development going on, and it's still this like thriving urban farm producing so much food that Soul Food takes to market and employs folks in the downtown east side to grow. And then they made us this little apiary so that we can be a part of things there, and our bees can pollinate the squash and the cucumbers and whatever else they might visit. So this is back to the Hastings Folk Garden, and I wanted to show this image so that we can perhaps imagine ourselves here at a future time where we would be gathering in. And this thing that happens in our workshops, which I love, is that we like talk in circles, we open in circles, we gather in circles, and the circle tends to get like smaller and smaller as the bees come out, as people kind of like move towards the bees. And one of the things I love about that is that the bees work in circles too. So again, this like reflection and this connection between how the bees are moving and how we are. So this is a really packed frame that we've pulled out of the center of one of the brood chambers of a honeybee colony. And I hope you can see this circle here. So we would expect at the heart of the hive, right in the center of this, like it's in a box, but actually it's a sphere. And in the center of the sphere is where we would find the queen, in here somewhere with her eggs, surrounded by the eggs that have matured into larvae, the larvae that are pupating, that have been capped. And that's what this sort of amber, almost like fluffy, puffy ring is here, and then surrounded by pollen, that is that protein source, and then surrounded by honey, which is both their carbohydrate, their energy source, but it's also insulation and protection. And I think of like Pooh Bear, who is always illustrated as like loving his honey. Actually, bears and raccoons and skunks and birds and most things that are natural predators of bees are after the larva, because the larva is the really rich protein source, but they get to the honey first because that's the bee's protective device. So they're clawing through, they're getting all that honey, which is of course delicious, and the bears love that too. But hopefully the bees can sting that bear enough to get it away before it gets to and destroys the queen and the eggs, because that is the life force of the colony. That is the center, and that is what the bees are defending, because without the queen, if they still have eggs, they can replace her, and that's kind of where I'm going now. Is how queens are made. But if they don't have eggs and they don't have a queen, that whole colony of like 60,000 bees is doomed, unless a beekeeper can intervene and give them eggs or give them a queen. So on this frame, I have a marked queen, so you might already see her. I won't point to her quite yet, but she is marked, which is a thing that we can do to help us spot the queen, because one bee in 60,000 can be a challenge to find. We don't have to see the queen to know that the colony has a queen and to know that the colony is healthy. We can tell, like as soon as we enter the apiary, we can tell if it's a healthy colony by their temperament. And then once we open the lid and move into the heart of that colony, we can tell by their sound and how they're reacting. And then as soon as we see eggs, we know there's a queen. So there are also drones on this frame. So if you're trying to queen spot right now, you might see a drone first, but they have that square hairy bum and those big bulgy eyes, whereas the queen has a tapered abdomen. She's not hairy because she only lays eggs. She doesn't collect any pollen. And in this case, she's marked. So here she is. I bet you found her. Marked with the yellow non-toxic pen, which just tells us the year that she was mated. It changes every year. Yellow, I think it was green this year. And surrounded by her workers, all heads down doing their work. And she's around getting groomed and tended by a couple of attendants here. And I'm going to try a video, so I'm going to leave the sound off because it's probably going to be choppy, because that is the reality of internet. So I'll start playing it, and I'll just kind of talk over it. So the little white grains of rice looking thing standing vertically in the bottom of each of those wax cells is a bee egg. And the queen bee is in this frame too. She's not marked in this video. This is an unmarked queen, but her abdomen is long and glistening. She pulls it out. She looks in the next cell. She tucks it in to lay an egg. And she gets surrounded by bees when she's laying, and they're grooming her and tending her, feeding her, checking in with her, and smelling her queen pheromone, which is a chemical that she exudes from these like mandibular glands that she has that like oozes down her body and makes her glisten and leaves this scent of like fertility that keeps the bees loyal to her, that keeps them supporting her. And if she becomes, like if her fertility is declining or if she's getting sick, she will stop smelling as good to them and they will replace her. So here she is in the still now. And here also in the still, like at the very tip of my cursor here, are these bee eggs. So one in every cell, which is exactly what we want to see when we look into a frame. One perfect little egg in every cell, a glistening queen that the bees are paying attention to. So let's go back to the PowerPoint here. And so if that is happening, if the queen, if her health is declining, if she is running out of sperm, so when a queen is first created, there's a special cell created for her. And these big cells here are queen cells. Here's a fully capped queen cell facing down. Here's the start of a queen cell. We call it a queen cup at this stage, facing down. Here is a queen cell that actually, it's cut off a bit here, but this little trap door here is where a queen has emerged and come out. And you can see it better in this one, although the trap door is gone. So this is a queen cell that a queen has chewed the end off of, and she has emerged out of here. There's 3 times that a queen will be made in a colony. One is what we call an emergency situation. So maybe that bear has come through the colony and it's killed the queen. Maybe a beekeeper has come through the colony and I've squished the queen between frames. I've been careless. Somehow the queen has died. It's unexpected. And what the bees need is any female egg in the colony, and they can turn that female egg into a queen just by feeding it special food, which is what we call royal jelly. So there's 2 kinds of eggs that a queen can lay. A mated queen can either lay a female egg, which is a fertilized egg, so it has the male sperm and the female egg that then hatch and develop and emerge as an adult worker female bee. Or she can lay an unfertilized egg, so it's just her egg, and that's what becomes a drone bee. So the male bees are just little, they're little packages of their mom that can go out there to spread that genetic code. And so all the bees need, if their queen dies unexpectedly, is a female egg, because they can change that egg that would have become a worker. They can give it special food and make it a queen. And I just want to pause on that for a second, because a queen can live 3 years where a worker only lives 45 days. A queen has a barbless stinger, so she can sting other insects over and over again without dying, where workers have barbed stingers like fishing hooks. So if they sting, the barb is stuck, their entrails are ripped out as they pull away, and they die when they sting. The worker bees can make wax. The worker bees have honey stomachs. The worker bees are hairy. The worker bees are small. The queen isn't hairy. She doesn't make honey. She doesn't make wax. So an entirely different physiology. She looks and behaves entirely differently, comes from the same egg. The only difference is the food. And this is why the Egyptian beekeepers were pretty sure that royal jelly equaled eternal life. And this is why royal jelly gets sold in all kinds of beauty products, to give us this life force that the queen gets. So yeah, there's the emergency situation, and then there's what we call a super seizure. So that is if the queen is failing, what we call failing. So she's getting old, she is running out of sperm because she's laid eggs for so many years or so many days. And that is when they will take, again, any worker cell, create a new queen, and replace that old queen. That's what we call super seizure. And then the third circumstance is a swarm, and that is when the colony is so strong and that queen is so strong that she stops laying eggs. They stop feeding her, so she loses a bit of weight so that she can fly, and she takes off with half of the colony and founds a new hive. They all fill up on honey so that they have lots of energy for making new comb for their new colony. And that's the swarm situation. So in any of those cases, female egg gets drawn out, gets fed royal jelly, elongates like this. They'll usually try and do, ideally they'll do more than 10 of those, and even up to 20 queen cells. And we call these virgin queen cells because they're not mated. And so the first queen to come out chews her way out of the cell, and she'll come out and climb through the entire colony, and she will sting through the side of any other virgin cell that she smells. She smells them out. She'll sting them to kill them. So in the case that another queen, like this cell, has also emerged, that is when they will fight to the death, so that one queen will emerge as the victorious queen. And then she's not done though. She then has to fly. She has to fly out, find drones, keep speeding through the air, mate with 16 male bees while she's flying. They all die as they fall off of her. She gathers all of their sperm into a sac in her abdomen, and then she returns to the colony, and she has to beat the weather. She has to beat like traffic. She has to beat humans, birds. So it's hard becoming a queen. So yeah, there are definitely fights between queens. Also, if we ever made the mistake of, like, sometimes when we're beekeeping, we're moving frames between colonies, and if I ever made the mistake of taking a queen and introducing her to another colony, those workers would kill her. Like, she wouldn't be accepted because she doesn't smell right. So the queens all have unique smells, and the bees are loyal to the smell of their mother, of their queen. And so if we're ever doing an introduction of a queen, like if instead of letting bees raise their own queen, we are raising a queen, we always introduce her in a little cage. So this is a queen cage where we have done the work of raising a queen, supporting her in getting mated, seeing that she's laying eggs, then we pick her up, we color her with a little dot, we put her in a cage, we fill the cage with candy. This is sugar candy, like the kind of stuff you would find on a cake, fondant. And so these worker bees are really excited about this queen. They are getting at her through the cage, they're feeding her, they're smelling her, and they will eat through this sugar. And then when they have eaten through this sugar, which takes them about 2 days, she will be released. And that amount of time gives them enough time to get used to her smell, so that then they will accept her. So yeah, it all comes down to these like pheromones and these communications that are going on, this like really complex language of the bees that is all smell and taste and touch and vibes and feel. So, okay, I'm going to move out of bee biology, but that was a lot. So are there any questions from like how queens are made, or the difference between males and females, or anything? You can put it in the chat. If you do have a question, I'm really happy to return to any of those slides. But I want to move into some gardening as well and show you why gardeners are a beekeeper's and a bee's best friend. So this is Cathedral Square. So it doesn't look like this anymore, but this is what it looked like 4 years ago. Pretty much just left and ignored and seen as problematic because people were seeking shelter there, you know, people who don't have a place to call their own. But with the Parks Board and with the Downtown Vancouver Business Improvement Association, we partnered to come into this space and transform it into a green space and do that reactivation in a way that focuses on inclusion and on not like sweeping people away. So this is our crew here: Mark, Eli, Dave and Kevin, who were with me on that day, and we were digging out blackberry, collecting glass, moving garbage, and then getting in soil and wood chips and plants. And so this is what it looks like. This was last year, so this is 3 years later, and then it's like even more of a meadow this year. So just to show like these transformations that are possible, and even in the heart of the city, like even in these places that are kind of deemed garbage dumps and deemed unsalvageable, like when we gather and when we partner and when we really like build that intent to build a place that is inclusive for all kinds of people and plants and pollinators, that we can do that, and then we can create really meaningful habitat and forage. So a diversity of plants blooming from early spring to late fall, all kinds of different colors here, these like purples and pinks that are favorites, reds that the hummingbirds love, those long tubular flowers, and undisturbed areas of soil so that bees, because most of the bees aren't social and don't live in cavities. They dig holes in the ground. They live in the ground. They live in piles of wood chips. They live in piles of leaves. They live in old sticks. They live in what we would call like a messy garden, but they live in what is actually like a thriving pollinator habitat. So trying to encourage people not to call gardens like messy, but to call them pollinator habitats and pollinator gardens. Because when we build gardens like that, when we build gardens that we're not over manicuring, we're not tilling the soil, we're not dousing them in chemicals, they're not just like grass lawns, which are in fact deserts for pollinators. When we build them to be this like thriving, bursting, all year, all season place of forage and food and habitat, then we get this diversity of pollinators showing up. So these are two bumblebees, and these are two unique species of bumblebee. I don't know the Latin, so I call them by some of their common names, or I call them by the coloration that they look to me. So this gets called a yellow banded or a yellow faced bumblebee, and this one I've heard called like a rusty bottomed or an orange banded bumblebee. Unique species of bumblebees will have different patterning. Some of them have like fluffy patches like yellow on their jaws. Some of them have dots on their back. Some of them are black, some of them are orange, some of them are red. And there's about 200 different species of bumblebee in North America. So these are two that we have in Vancouver on this pink cosmos flower. That's one of my personal faves. And then here we have a honeybee. So I've been talking a lot about those, and you might recognize her. Her stripes are from her hairs. So most bees, their stripes are from their hairs, that are how they collect pollen. So this honeybee rather on the right is face down in this beautiful rose, just nestling in to find that nectar and getting covered in pollen. Then she will carry to the next rose. And this is a cute little mason bee. So bees are often black. They're often a lot smaller than the honeybee or the bumblebee. There's some really tiny, tiny bees that almost look like they could be mosquitoes, but they are mining bees probably. You know, bees are this huge diversity. We have green bees, we have metallic blue bees, we have red bees. They don't all look like the honeybee that we find on like our box of Honey Nut Cheerios, or in most of the portrayals of bees in the world. And we're really lucky to have that diversity in BC with this like really diverse terrain, from ocean to mountain to desert to rainforest that we get to live in. Oh, this little bee in my home right now. Okay. Like knows I'm talking about them. So here's another bumblebee, another different bumblebee on some cherry blossom, these like really bright red hairs, with these yellow patches that I was talking about. And bumblebees are really important pollinators. The wild bees are really important pollinators. So to be growing food that feeds all the bees helps us grow food for our human communities as well. Another cherry blossom, this one honeybee, who get employed in urban agriculture in a really significant way. And it's why we focus on them often, because of that honey and wax that is unique, and because they are manageable, because of their social behavior. We can move them in and out of crops, and get them pollinating our crops. But if we plant like pollinator perimeters, if we plant wild flowers around our crops and our gardens, if we create habitat like undisturbed soil or nooks and crannies for the bees to live, we actually get more successful crops, so that we can have our fruit. So many of you may know this, that like 2/3 or even more of our food is directly due to a bee having pollinated it. Definitely the cherries and the blueberries and the raspberries and the thimbleberries, all of these berries that are around right now, but also like the squash and the pumpkin, tomatoes that are bumblebee pollinated, all the legumes, like even the wild things like lupin, that is a pea family that is pollinated by bumblebees. Like it all requires pollination to happen. And it's not just bees. Like bees are my favorite. They're cute, especially the honeybees. They make honey. The bumblebees are so fluffy and buzzy and that like beautiful low like C buzz. But flies pollinate too. They are passive pollinators, so they're mostly there for the nectar. These are two flies that often get mistaken for bees. Flies will often mimic bees for defense reasons. So getting to know what is a fly and what is a bee is one of the fun ways I've been learning pollinators and just connecting with my garden. And the giveaway, the best like distinguishing factor that I use is the stubby antenna. So they have 2 wings instead of 4. They're not always hairy, but sometimes they are. But if you can catch that antenna, stubby antenna are flies. So even though this looks like a bumblebee at first glance, it's got the stubby antenna. And even though this looks kind of like a honeybee at first glance, super stubby antenna. So those are both flies mimicking bees so that predators will be scared of their sting. butterflies and moths too. Moths usually at night and less colorful, butterflies super flashy and in the day, also really important. Pollinators, and also require these like so-called messy gardens. They lay their larvae in and amongst leaf litter. So if we as gardeners get really picky and like scrape all of our leaves away, we're scraping habitat away. So encouraging gardeners and homeowners to dedicate like at least a corner to let it just be wild, let the leaves fall, let them gather. Also hummingbirds, the Anna's hummingbird that is such a beauty and such a treat to see in our gardens in Vancouver, really attracted to long red and orange tubular flowers. Always the flower is gonna kind of be the inverse of the beak or the proboscis. So these flowers, these long tubular ones, are often attracting butterflies and hummingbirds, whereas the more open flowers like yarrow or tansy or licorice mint are attracting like beetles and all kinds of bees that have shorter tongues that can fit into them. The lupin that I was mentioning is specifically for bumblebees because it needs the weight of the bumblebee on the lower petal to let the pollen stamens come out. So there's all these really specific relationships. Some insect pollinators are entirely dependent on one plant for their food. So there are these really like long-lasting relationships that do exist. So I wanted to show one of our more current gardens, which is this is a month ago and it's totally different. We're working with the Downtown Eastside Neighborhood House. They're growing food. These beds have now all been turned over. All this cover crop has been turned over. They are all full of tomatoes and squash. And there's a plant sale this weekend where seedlings are being sold sliding scale at the Astoria on East Hastings, and where we're going to have our honey on Sunday from noon until 4. But yeah, just the like joy and pride that comes with caring for the land and for creating opportunities for people to care for the land is something that we experience in our gardens, and something that I'm really grateful to the bees to opening the doors to us for. So this is Mark and Paula at the Astoria, this like super urban mural and telephone pole and bar and recycling and street setting, and within it we get all of these medicines of the plants, this like plantain, this like massive sage, and we get to start filling it with medicines for the people and for the land and for the bees alike. I also wanted to share a couple of more images. Been kind of sharing some story throughout of the folks that make our programming possible. So this is Kevin, actually at Cathedral Square with me in the background. I'm a hand talker, which you might have noticed. So I'm like talking bees, and Kevin's helping me facilitate here. So he's holding a frame and passing it around to all of our participants who are all veiled up. Kevin is a great beekeeper and very passionate about the bees, and also an advocate in the community, working to support illicit alcohol drinkers in coming into community, finding access to health, and working together to counter the isolation that is really at the root of so many health issues. And like this connection and this sharing of food is I think the way that we can combat it and build belonging together. This is Dennis repping one of our Hives to Humanity t-shirts there at the Hastings Folk Garden. Dennis is one of our volunteers who opens the folk garden twice a week these days for 3 or 4 hours to make it a space where people can come in, to keep an eye out for people so that if they are using, that they're not using alone and not risking overdose alone. Where our neighbors are the supervised injection sites, so we have a great relationship there and access to health and overdose response. And Florence, who is one of the gardeners and also volunteers on our board of directors, holding one of our flights of honey. Honey is different depending on the season, and it's different depending on the flowers, the gardens of the neighborhood. The bees can travel like 5 or 8 kilometers. They'll go as short a distance as possible, but the honey will reflect the neighborhood. So even the honey from downtown Vancouver compared to downtown East Side, compared to Strathcona, compared to East Van, those are 4 very distinct honeys. They're pretty similar over the seasons, but they're distinct as neighborhoods, often because I think in the city, the bees are foraging trees and tree blossoms and aphid nectar as well. And the trees are often planted in swaths, and the trees are pretty different. They are planted in neighborhood patches. So all of this contributes to the honey eating this experience then that is one of pride, that showcases the diversity of our communities in Vancouver. And then one of the last slides I'll show is of Fraser, who's here pouring beeswax candles. So we do have social enterprise as part of our programming. We do a lot of outreach and gardening and training and work together to steward these garden spaces and create them as opportunities for people to come in, share their skills, learn new skills, share their stories and be in community. And then we also sell our honey, always with this story of connection, and create candles to sell, again, always with the story of belonging and connection through the bees, to create money, to support our programming, to fund it, and to make opportunities possible in communities that otherwise couldn't afford it. I love these. These are these turn into skeps, so a little classic beehive and these big triangles. And Fraser's one of our gardeners and woodworkers and beekeepers as well. One of the things we always do, and as I'm kind of coming to the end here, and we'll move into questions for the last sort of 10 minutes, is I always want to ask people to reflect on what has come up for them. Is there a word? And often the best one is the one that first comes to mind. And it might be a smell or a taste. It might be a bee biology word. It might be something you're feeling when you think about the bees. But yeah, what do you feel when you think about the bees, when you think about your garden, when you think about the land? What word comes up for you? And if you want to share it, either in the chat on the Zoom or in the comments on the Facebook, I will collect them. I will harvest them and cherish them, and I will share them back through our annual report at the end of the year, where we get these bee clouds of words, and these are collected from workshops that happen with gardeners like you, with beekeepers in the downtown east side like I've been showing, with tourists who are visiting the Vancouver Convention Centre, with chefs who are using our honey in fancy restaurants downtown. And one of the things I love about the bees in the gardens is that the words tend to be the same. This experience of connection to land and food is one of inspiration and sweetness. Yes, vital, great word, Lise. It's one of beauty, and often there's this gratitude that rises too, and it really doesn't matter where you're coming from, the socioeconomic, labels that we place, the ability judgments that we place, these boxes that we fit each other into, these preconceived notions of who somebody is based on what they look like or how they move, or how they show up. The bees don't care, the gardens don't care. And really, if we can connect through that shared humanity, yeah, Shireen, thank you, that inner connection that is so true and so central, then I think we can have healthier communities for that, more sustainable communities, and build these reciprocal relationships where we're giving back to the land for all that it gives to us. So thank you for your words. I'm going to write them down, and I will add them into our bee cloud. And I'll just put it on here for a minute. I'm just writing vital and interconnection down. Those are great words. And I will send these to DIGA so that these can be sent out, because you can't click on them right now. Actually, you know what I will do is I will also just put them in the comment here in case anybody's really keen to get at them right away. But yeah, there's our website, and we do lots of storytelling on our social media and through our newsletter. If you are interested in learning more about flowers that feed the bees, these are my favorite resources that are local or local-ish. So Earthwise Society is out in Delta. They have amazing lists of how to feed the bees. You can get lost in them for hours. The Xerces Society, which is more general invertebrate knowledge, but also Pacific Northwest Coast, and West Coast Seeds, which are a great source for organic and non-GMO. And they have beautiful pollinator blends too, if you want to convert your grass into a pollinator lawn. I've also been really enjoying over my journey with honeybees, opening up to like all of these other bees that I've been talking about and learning how to identify them and learning their names and coming into more connection with the land through learning the bees that have been here. So Bee Friendly on the North Shore has some great identification guides. The Environmental Youth Alliance has a beautiful pollinator guide that is linked there that is available for free download that I just like carry in my bag all the time. I see a bee that I don't know, I can find its name, or at least its family. Native Bee Society is doing really beautiful work too and has lots of resources that they're building, and Border Free Bees as well. Some great like coloring sheets if you're into coloring that I really enjoyed from their website. So yeah, they're in the chat, and I will email them so they can come out to folks who signed up today. But yeah, wanting to say thank you, and then also leave it open for a bit for any questions about any of this or any thoughts, or if anybody wants to come on mic perhaps and share a story. I don't know if we can do that. But yeah, I would just welcome you to take a look at our website, take a look at the calendar, come out to any of our workshops, and yeah, get to know the bees. Oh, thank you, Shireen. Just yeah, I do have a passion for, and I really, it's because they've like changed my life, you know, like they've been healing for me, and they've given me an opportunity to make that healing available to others. So and it is really this like connection that happens, like you like honey, you get into the honeybees, you start realizing that they depend on the plants, you start like learning about all the plants and all the medicine of the plants, and then it becomes this like cycle of the seasons. So yeah, always excited to speak to gardeners because I think you know this. I don't think this is like news to you. The medicine of our gardens. Yeah, thank you, Christina. Yeah, please do follow up with those, and my contact is on the website too. So if you want to follow up, or if you're working in other communities, or if you want to think about opportunities for getting together or any of it, yeah, please do reach out. I'll just pause a bit in case there's any other questions coming through. Oh, cool. Lise, you took an apiculture course in undergrad over a decade ago. Oh, so good. Yeah. I hope it all comes back. I feel like I learn something new every time I'm in the bees. Like actually, we just did a pollinator ID workshop with Environmental Youth Alliance, who are linked here. And one of the bees that's in their guide is the wool carder bee. So it's a native bee to BC. Its markings are not its hairs. Its markings are actually like tattoos, like on its skin. It collects pollen on its legs, like, so it has these like long sheathed hairy legs. And the males don't die after they mate. They stick around, they're loyal to the mother bee, the female bee they mated with, and they protect her, and they like bounce other bees off of flowers. They'll like defend their territory together, and they'll be mated for life, which is a season with them. So, you know, there's all these like nuances to all of these different species and their behavior, and a lot of beauty and diversity in the bees. And they're called wool carder because they scrape the leaves and they collect the fiber from the leaves, and then they make this wool, which is how they line their cells where they lay their eggs. Yes, Biology of the Honeybee is an amazing book. I like have it within arm reach. And also Mark Winston's Bee Time. Mark is like a beautiful writer and poet. And in Bee Time, he shares this story of like the cyclical nature of honeybees and of our human communities. And actually he writes about the gift of honey too, which reminds me of Robin Wall Kimmerer's writing. Robin Wall Kimmerer wrote a book called Braiding Sweetgrass, which the braids of like plant knowledge and traditional indigenous knowledge and Western scientific knowledge, and braiding all of those together to deepen our understanding of nature and of our part in nature. And she writes about gift and duty, and yeah, this like gift that nature gives us and our duty to give it back. And Mark writes about that too in this wonderful thing about honeybees, which is that we get this like amazing golden honey. And one of my favorite things to do with honey is gift it. So gifting it in our workshops and gifting it to our volunteers. And I think I experienced that with gardeners too, like gifting our flowers, gifting our massive zucchini that has grown out of control, whatever it might be. But yeah, I super recommend reading any Mark Winston, and whenever I'm stuck in my colony, I go to the index of that biology of the honeybee book, because it's like all of the research is there. So yeah, a really great companion for any beekeeper for sure. Lovely. Okay, well, thank you then for your questions, and yeah, wherever you are today, hoping that you get a chance to get out there and maybe learn the name of a new pollinator, spend some time watching them buzz, watching your plants grow and sway, and thinking about how you are on this land and how you're working to like listen to the land and hear the voice of the land that really is a being, you know, like all these insects, these plants, they are our kin too, they are our community too. And learning to listen to them, and to listen to these voices that aren't always heard, I think is our work in this time, you know, this time where so much has been revealed by this pandemic, so much inequity, so much violence, and that I think the way that I want to work to combat it is to really like learn how to listen and then to take accountability and to take action, and gardening is action. So so thank you for your action, and I will look forward to seeing you around in community. So thanks for joining, everyone, and thanks to the Disabled Independent Gardeners Association for hosting and having us, and hivesforhumanity.com to get in touch or for more information. Okay, bye.
Thank you.